morning, fifth graders. This is Mrs. Kalen coming to you from my house. I hope everybody is well and that you enjoyed your spring break. I hope you read a lot of great books. We're back to meeting together this way by video. I'm hoping that we'll get in a few Zoom meetings before the end of the year as well, so that I can really see your faces and hear from you and do some interactive lessons as well. But for now, this is how we'll be meeting. And we are going to get started. I wanted to make sure that we got to continue some of the wonderful High Point traditions that we have in the library, and it is April, so it's Poetry Month. I know that particularly I've heard from fifth graders how you have enjoyed this in the past, and I want to give you the opportunity to do some of the things that we really love to do during Poetry Month. We're going to do some activities later in the month for Poem in Your Pocket Day. It's at the very end of the month this year. I'm hoping to do a poetry reading together with volunteers to read aloud in coming weeks. So we'll be in touch about that. Today what we're going to do is read a book that is a biography of a poet that you may have read some of his works before, you may not have, but before we read the book about him, we're going to read a poem by him. I'm going to first show you the poem, and then I will read the poem to you, because this poet, E.E. Cumings, is known for the way, not just the way that he made poems sound, which is sort of, when you think about poetry, you think about words and the way that the words sound together. E.E. Cumings, who wrote poetry in the early 20th century, he was an American poet, played around a lot with the way a poem would look. Think about the way that you can make a word look, or a paragraph, or a sentence. You can change the font, you can change the size of the words. You can also change things like punctuation, spelling, breaking words up into pieces, arranging words in a page in different shapes. And these are all things that E.E. Cumings did to show that a poem can be affected in the way that it sounds and the way that it feels, can be affected also by the way that it looks. So I'm going to show you first this poem. This is actually in the book of this biography that we're going to read today, called Enormous Smallness. But as you can see, this poem is actually, it's going to look backwards to you, I'm realizing, as I'm showing it here. I will send out a link as well when I send out this video. I'll attach a link so you can see on a page a few of his poems and read them yourselves. They're very short, but you can just kind of look along and see that how unique his poems were in how they looked. One of the things that he did was use interesting punctuation, capitalization, things like that to change the way that a poem both looked and sounded. I'm going to read this poem to you that I just showed you there. The sky was candy, luminous, edible, spry pinks, shy lemons, cool greens, chocolates, under a locomotive spouting violets. So think about the way that feels, and also the way that looks. Unusual, right? Okay, so now we're going to read all about the life of E.E. Cumings. This is called Enormous Smallness, a story of E.E. Cumings by Matthew Burgess. This is a quote that begins this book. It takes courage to grow up and become who you really are. So think about that. You are still growing up and thinking about what you might want to grow up to become, whether that is some kind of profession or just what kind of person you might, think that you would like to be, something that you admire. So it's not easy, right? To follow those dreams that you have. Enormous Smallness. Inside an enormous city, in a house on a very small street, there once lived a poet I would like you to meet. Now, this book is not all in rhyme, and it's interesting to me that this starts out with this sort of rhyming paragraph because E. E. Cummings' poems, as you heard before, did they rhyme? Not usually. His name, E. E. Cummings. Here is his window at 4 Patchen Place in New York City. Peek inside and you will see the room where E. E. writes his poetry. And here you see all these letters. Throughout the book, you'll see these letters almost snowing around the pages, swirling around. And when you look at his poems, I think this is a really beautiful way to sort of illustrate the way that he wrote, because it's almost like you can imagine all these letters sort of swirling around, and the way that his brain would write poetry is almost just kind of gathering them up and arranging them artfully on a page. While sitting at his typewriter, E. E. listens to the birds singing outside his window. May my heart always be open to little birds who are the secrets of living. Whether they sing is better than to know, and if men should not hear them, then men are old. In the room below his studio, a woman rings an elephant with a bell in its belly. Ding, 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 time for tea. She is Marian Morehouse, a fashion model and photographer, and the love of E. E.'s life. But how did he become a poet? And why is he called E. E.? Edward Estlin Cummings was born on October 14th, 1894. His parents were Edward and Rebecca Cummings, and they lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Estlin grew up in a lively house at 104 Irving Street with his mother, father, 2 grandmas, 2 aunts, 1 rambunctious Uncle George, his younger sister Elizabeth, the handyman Sandy Hardy, an Irish maid named Mary, a dog, a cat, a goldfish, and some rabbits. Does this sound like the kind of house where someone could quietly write poetry? Maybe a little challenging, right? From his bedroom window, Estlin could see the enormous apple tree and cherry trees. Looking out, he watched the birds hop branch to branch and tree to tree. So even the words in this book about him are kind of arranged artfully the way E. E. might have done that. And his first poem flew out of his mouth when he was only 3. Oh, my little birdie, oh, with his little toe, toe, toe. When Estlin said his poems aloud, his mom would write them down. She made a little book titled Estlin's Original Poems. When Estlin was 6, he wrote a poem about trees. Sunny in the morning, beautiful and fair, maple trees are happy in the frosty air. Beautiful, his mom exclaimed. What else do you see? Estlin looked around as if his eyes were on tiptoes, and when his heart jumped, he said another poem. On the chair is sitting Daddy with his book, took it from the bookcase, beaming in his look. Can you imagine 6-year-olds? I have a 6-year-old. My son is 6. He doesn't usually talk that way about his parents. Soon, elephants started marching into Estlin's poems and drawings. Inspired by the circus and the zoo, he pretended his father was an elephant and rode across the carpet on his back. Take me to the jungle, you enormous beast, Estlin would holler, and Mr. Cummings would stomp on his hands and knees into an imaginary wilderness. As Estlin grew, he drew many pictures from the great circus of his imagination. But even more than drawing elephants, trees, and birds, Estlin loved words. What words say and how they sound and look. Estlin liked to invent new words, like this one, wash ho, Zephyr. And he squished others together like this, bean ham egg. Whether playing on the swings or monkey bars in the yard, or leading his friends on an adventure through the neighborhood, Estlin knew how to make life fun. Sometimes they would sit on a roof at night, gazing up at the stars. When school was out in June, Estlin and his family went to Joy Farm in New Hampshire, where they spent long summer days. There, Estlin swam in the stream, milked the cow named Buttercup Daisy, rode Jack the donkey, and wandered with his dog Rex through fields and forests. In the enchanted afternoon, Estlin wrote and drew in the small cabin his father made for him at the edge of the woods. And I think this is like so telling about his family, that they really saw him as a poet, even as a child, that they gave him space to write. Back home on Irving Street, in one particularly enormous tree, Estlin and his father built a small house in the branches. They even installed a stove to keep him cozy on winter days. There, snug and warm, Estlin and his friends would pop popcorn, toast toast, and stir hot cocoa on the little stove. Estlin also liked being there alone. Drawing pictures, writing poems, he would peer out at the world above and the world below. When Estlin was 11, his favorite teacher, Miss Maria Baldwin, noticed his wonderful way with words and encouraged him. From her, Estlin learned that anything is possible as long as you are true to yourself and never give up, even when the world seems to say, stop. For Estlin's 15th birthday, his Uncle George gave him the Rhymester, a guide to writing poems with samples of styles like sonnets and triolets. It soon became one of Estlin's prized possessions, and he learned to follow the rules of rhythm and rhyme, writing poem after poem, one a day, though sometimes only on weekends and holidays, until he was 20. So he started out following the rules of these other types of poems before he was really writing in his own style. A month before his 17th birthday, Estlin began his freshman year at Harvard College, just a few blocks away from his home on Irving Street. Estlin quickly made friends and found professors who inspired him. He also began publishing his poems in the Harvard magazine. In his senior year, Estlin moved from home into his own dorm room on campus. He covered his walls with Crazy Cat comic strips and a parade of elephants that marched across his mantelpiece. And I'm actually going to show you something when I finish, because I happen to have a parade of elephants marching across my mantelpiece. One day, Estlin read these words by his favorite poet, John Keats. I am certain of nothing but the holiness of the heart's affections and the truth of the imagination. I love those words, the truth of the imagination. Think about that. We usually think about the imagination as coming up with things that maybe are imaginary, not true, made up, but there's a real truth of feeling in all of those brilliant ideas that you come up with. Estlin knew it would take courage to follow his heart, but he was determined to live the life that he imagined. After graduation, Estlin electrified his audience with a speech titled The New Art. He talked about Gertrude Stein, Paul Cézanne, Igor Stravinsky, artists who were challenging the way we think and see. This was at a time where something called modernism was happening, and it was a really different way that writers and artists and poets were all coming together to do a very different type of art. In all the arts, people were in pursuit of the new, and Estlin wanted to make his mark too. After graduation, Estlin returned to his old home on Irving Street. There in his attic room, he experimented with his poetry. But adventures awaited him, so when he saved enough money, Estlin headed for New York City. Filled with artists and poets, Greenwich Village was the place to be. He loved it immediately. I also breathed as if for the first time, he said. Estlin wandered the streets with his friends for hours on end. Sometimes they'd stop at Corey's for shish kebab or pop into bookshops to browse for secondhand paperbacks. He loved the city's irresistible, stupendous newness. But shortly after Estlin arrived in New York City, everything changed when the United States entered World War I. It was April 6th, 1917. The very next day, Estlin volunteered to drive an ambulance in France. 3 weeks later, he boarded a ship to sail across the Atlantic. Estlyn's mother traveled to New York to send him off with a kiss. His father sent a telegram to show that he would be missed. Here's the telegram. It says, "As I said in advance, I envy your chance of breaking a lance for freedom in France by driving and mending an ambulance. Best of luck, the best of luck and love a soldier ever had, from Betsy, Mother, Jane, Nana, and Dad." So just reading this, do you think there was some poetry, or at least interest in poetry, in his family? While awaiting his assignment with the Ambulance Corps, Estlyn explored Paris with his journal in his hand. Bowled over by museums, the ballet, the colorful crowded streets, Estlyn drank in every detail. After only a few weeks, Estlyn had to report for duty in the countryside, but he would return to Paris many times throughout his life. While working for the Ambulance Corps, Estlyn was mistaken for a spy and sent to prison. He was released a few months later. When the war was over, Estlyn joined his family at Joy Farm, where he wrote a book about his experiences in the war, called The Enormous Room. The book was published and praised. Estlyn was becoming E.E. So a number of people write under what's called a pseudonym, which is a fake name that they use for writing, and some just use a type of pen name, which is like something that they would be called as a writer, but may not be what you would call them if you were talking to them face to face. So he went by E.E. as a writer. That was how he signed his poems and his books. But like if you were talking to him, you would probably still call him Estlyn. A year later, his first book of poems was published, Tulips and Chimneys. Using a style all of his own, E.E. put lowercase letters where capitals normally go, and his playful punctuation grabbed readers' attention. His poems were alive with experimentation and surprise. And because of his love of lowercase letters, his name began to appear with 2 little e's and a little c too. So even on the front of a book, it wouldn't look like that. It would look like, I'll show you. In further poems, it was E.E. Cumings. Oh, we'll see it throughout the book. E.E. liked it, right there, like E.E. there. E.E. liked to break the rules of rhythm and rhyme and make words dance across the page in surprising ways. Does anyone know what these pieces of punctuation that he put in here are? So you've got parentheses in there. So you use parentheses, ellipses, which are like the 3 dots that you might see together, and he would put them in places that you might not expect to see them, which kind of makes you sort of stop and look at the words. He wanted his readers' eyes to be on tiptoe, seeing and reading poetry in a way that was new. Some people criticized him for painting with words. Others said his poems were too strange, too small. Some said they were not good at all. And here's that poem that we read before. The sky was candy, luminous, edible, spry pinks, shy lemons, cool greens, chocolates under a locomotive spouting violets. But no matter where in the world, what the world was giving or taking, E.E. went right on dreaming and making. For inside, he knew his poems were new and true. Love is a place, this is another poem. Love is a place, and through this place of love, move with brightness of peace, all places. Yes is a world, and in the world of yes, live skillfully curled all worlds. His poems were his way of saying yes. Yes to the heart, yes of the roundness of the moon, to the birds, elephants, trees, and everything he loved. Yes to spring too, which always brought him back to childhood, when the first signs of his favorite season was the whistling arrival of the balloon man. And this is the poem. I'm going to read this to you about this balloon man. In just spring, when the world is mud, luscious, the little lame balloon man whistles far, and we and Eddie and Bill come running from marbles and piracies, and it's spring, and the world is a puddle. Wonderful. The queer old balloon man whistles far, and we and Betty and Isabel come dancing from hopscotch and jump rope, and it's spring. and the goat-footed balloon man whistles far and wee. In time, more and more people came to see the beauty of E.E.'s poetry, and he became one of the most beloved poets in America. Time for tea, Marion rings the elephant bell. The table is set, the tea is ready. E.E. lived at 4 Patchen Place for almost 40 years. When asked why, he would reply, because here's friendly, unscientific, private human. So that's how he felt about himself. Like the treehouse of his youth, the top floor back room was a small world where E.E. could work and dream, peering out at the world and the world below. As an old man, Edward Estlin Cumings often remembered his childhood days in the lovely house on Irving Street. He could still see himself as a boy gazing out at the sunset. And like the little bird singing outside his window, E.E. sang, and his song was a poem. This is how the book concludes. Who you are, little I, 5 or 6 years old, peering from some high window at the gold of November sunset and feeling that if day has to become night, this is a beautiful way. And there are many other poems of his in the back of the book that we can take a look at. I'm going to send you, along with our video this week, some poems of E.E.'s so that you can look at them a little closer. I know that when we do this, you get sort of the backwards look, the mirror look, but it's fun to be able to look at these poems and see the different shapes and ways that the words are spaced and played around with. So I hope you enjoyed that. We will meet again next week. And we will, I think next week we'll probably be reading some poems together, and I'll send some out ahead of time and see if anybody wants to maybe volunteer to read a poem to us. Have a great week, everybody. Miss you. And if you have any questions or want any recommendations of books to read, I would love to help you out. So you can email me anytime or write to me via your Google Classroom page, and I will talk to you soon. Bye, everybody.